Hi, I'm JR. This is Who to Blame for the recent culture of distress and blame. All right? So, who do I blame for the recent culture of distress and blame? Well, first, I'm going to apologize for something. Here's what it is. Basically, I personally started the culture of distress and blame. It was me. Uh, Specifically, I started on March 3rd, 2003 when I published my first speculations about how economic trends would be changing along with trends of social psychology, um, which is the subject matter of the field of socionomics. Trends of social psychology includes things like idealism, optimism, hope, fear, distress, and blame, envy, belligerence, rage, and realism. Those would be trends in social psychology. So in 2004, I elaborated on what I had written in 2003 when I published details of an emerging spike in fuel prices that I asserted would destabilize certain trends of excess. You can, if you go to thedominoileffect.com, domino il, thedominoileffect.com, you can see a couple pieces of that. I think there's a link to the original article as well. So in that publication, I started to refer to what would be happening as far as economic choices that people would be making. But throughout the years 2003, 4, and so on, I have referred occasionally to the psychology of blame that I expected to coincide with the shift in um, behavior. And when I say behavior, I mean like how much fuel people bought, how much fuel was supplied by oil companies and refined by oil companies and distributed to the various places, how much borrowing there would be for real estate, how much spending there would be for investment into stock markets, how much selling there would be relative to how much buying. Those are the kind of behaviors that produce fluctuations in price. So by 2008, so in 2004, I was talking about an emerging spike in fuel prices, and in 2008, a gallon of gasoline cost over $11 in parts of Europe. And at the same time, many politicians, such as George W. Bush, had gone from record high approval ratings to record lows, to record low approval ratings. So myself, along with other researchers and students of the field of socionomics, had generally predicted the global credit crisis and the resulting real estate decline and crash of financial stocks in particular, and stock markets in general. And along with that, we predicted a collapse in the approval ratings of the US president, um, irrespective of the individual and the policies of that individual. We have noted over time that when stock market prices rise, approval ratings of presidents tend to rise. So it's not, certainly it's not absolute, but it's a very high correlation. So anticipating a very significant decline in stock markets and so on, we anticipated a huge drop in presidential approval ratings, and that's in fact exactly what we saw. If you were to review the approval ratings of Tony Blair and other politicians in other places in the same period of time, across that same transition, you might find exactly what we anticipated. Across the board, governors, leaders of nations, any politicians, overall, the approval ratings dropped tremendously. Now, when I say that, I actually haven't especially studied to document that that's true. But I anticipated it. I know it's true in the case of George W. Bush. And I don't have enough interest in the actual details of the data to have looked at, a bunch of different um, political figures and their approval ratings. But consider for yourself, did you look at various politicians less and less favorably during the time period of the real estate decline and the stock market decline starting in 2007, crashing in 2008? Did you have any experience of a decline in your approval toward any political leaders, or even towards um, the media in general, or towards corporations in general? If not, so be it, but consider that a lot of people did have that experience. So, um, we predicted a collapse in prices of various things, as well as a corresponding collapse in approval ratings of various leaders, including political leaders. Socionomists, I need to pronounce it right, socionomists like me interpreted that the coming shift in investment trends and in approval ratings were two symptoms of a single process: a shift from idealism to realism, where we had this excessively high expectations and associations with certain figures. Then simply we got more uh, accurate as to the reality. That's one way of viewing it. We could also call it a shift from excess to conservation or conservatism. Excess borrowing, excess spending. We may point to politicians and governments and say they are spending too much and they are borrowing too much. But um, it's actually a cultural phenomenon. There was a whole lot of borrowing and a whole lot of spending, not so much saving. Some cultures in some periods of time, there's a lot of saving. There was a whole lot of spending and borrowing going on, and not a lot of saving. 2004, again, as time went on into 2008, people were spending more and more on fuel, and so they were doing less speculation, less excess, less borrowing in general. The whole social mood shifted toward conservatism, toward what might be called realism. Some people might say pessimism, but certainly away from optimism and also away from presumptiveness. I'm going to assert that there was a lot of presumptiveness in 2004, 2002, at various times. People were not especially prudent, didn't do a lot of research before making their choices. Maybe more and more these days people are researching competent forecasts from competent forecasters and before they make choices. And by competent, I simply mean anyone with an established record of accuracy. So, while many socionomists predicted a rise in fuel prices, I personally am not aware of any who gave the potential spike in fuel prices the emphasis that I did by 2004 and into 2005. I continued to emphasize it. In 2004, I wrote a publication called The Real U.S. Deficit Oil, in which I coined the term the domino oil effect. And then in 2005, Worth Its Weight in Oil, which I wrote directly in response to the beginning of a hysterical optimism about metals, precious metals such as gold. So I took the saying, worth its weight in gold, and I said worth its weight in oil. And to this day, 7 years later, there's still a whole lot of people who have this really amazing kind of religious dedication to precious metals markets at the, in the mode of dismissing the importance of fuel and energy, which I find somewhat familiar because that's the mode I was in 2003. But by 2004, I started to realize, wait a minute, fuel prices, $5 a gallon, $10 a gallon, that would be a pretty big deal. And if, let's say that gold prices went from $300 an ounce to, $1,600 an ounce. Most people wouldn't care. Most people wouldn't know. If you go around and talk to really the average people, most of them don't know what's happened with gold prices in the last 10 years, last 30 years. Why would they? Gold's just not important to the average consumer. Gasoline, I think most consumers have noticed some changes in recent years in gasoline. So, so I gave a lot of emphasis to a potential spike in fuel prices as a bit of a distinction from the herd or crowd of socioeconomists in general. I knew that spiking fuel prices would slow the economy in the U.S., which they have, but I also knew that the U.S. was still the #3 oil-producing nation in the planet, and according to official statistics, that is, and the U.S. therefore, because it produced so much oil, as oil prices rose, the U.S. would actually benefit to a certain extent from that rise in fuel prices, because the U.S. was a huge producer of oil relative to most of the world. So it would do better than many other places would do as fuel prices spiked. And in fact, that is exactly what we have seen in parts of Europe, such as Greece and Italy. They didn't have decades of amassed wealth from their prior oil productivity, like the US and USSR did. And those two countries rose to global prominence in the 20th century, specifically as the #1 and #2 producers of oil. It made a huge difference. They had very different political systems. So for either country to, the patriotic loyalists of either country to assert that the political system had a lot to do with the success of those two countries, I think that's a stretch. I think what's really obvious is they were the #1 and #2 producers of oil for almost the entire 20th century. And lots of other countries with really similar political systems to either the Soviet Union or the United States didn't rise to be global superpowers. So, in contrast to the oil-rich regions of the US and USSR, certain parts of Europe, like Greece and Italy, were nearly as dependent on importing fuel as Japan, whose economic bubble has been shrinking since 1989. Now, those developed nations with huge trade deficits from importing crude oil, and the U.S. is amongst them. Again, in 2004, I called my article the real U.S. deficit oil. But other places had much bigger deficits relative to the size of the place. Other places had much bigger deficits for importing fuel. And those developed nations with huge trade deficits from importing crude oil did not fare very well, as oil prices went from $11 per barrel in 1999 to $148 per barrel in 2008, an increase of over 1,200% in 9 years. So while many Americans complain as current gasoline prices range from $3.37 in places like Oklahoma and South Carolina to over $1 higher in California and Hawaii. Well, in the UK and Germany, gasoline has been more than $10 or even $11 per gallon. So we can imagine that while it's been, notable in the US that gasoline and other fuel prices have risen somewhat, over 100% in many cases, it's been a lot bigger increase and a lot bigger impact in certain other parts of the world. So who do I blame for high fuel prices? I blame Europeans, who are willing and able to pay $10 or more per gallon. Also, I blame the oil companies for being willing and able to find, extract, refine, and distribute fuel throughout the developed and developing nations. Because if it wasn't for no oil, then no gas, there wouldn't be high gas prices, see? And if it wasn't for people with, cars and highways and an interest in getting from one place to another, they wouldn't buy fuel. So that's who I blame. Now you got that. All right. Who do I blame for high real estate prices? I don't know if you know, but in some parts of the world and in the U.S. as well, in some places they rose quite a bit at certain times recently. Who do I blame for that? Well, speculative borrowers who are willing and able to pay a few $1,000s down and go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. That's who I blame. They are the ones who drove up real estate prices so high, including rents. But why am I even talking about blame? Why don't I celebrate the huge rise in real estate prices or the huge rise, 1,200% rise in price of oil in only 9 years? Well, I didn't make hundreds of thousands of dollars in quick earned gains by flipping houses. So not only that, but many other people did, you see, right? So there's like the potential jealousy kind of factor right there. So if I'm jealous of the folks who did make a whole lot of money quickly, then why not blame someone for the fact that my rent is not 10% lower or 50% lower? Okay? Well, why should my rent be 10% lower or 50% lower? I don't know. But somebody made a bunch of money off real estate prices going up, right? And I was not one of them. So why not notice the growing social approval toward blaming other people for the details of my life and join in on the culture of blame that I personally started on March 3rd, 2003. It's only natural, right? Now, why don't I appreciate the immense abundance in my midst? Like the fact that there's so much gasoline available to me, like within 5 miles of me, there's a lot of gasoline. It's only like, $3.70 a gallon. And I've got like hundreds of dollars in my pocket, or in my wallet in the other room. Hundreds of dollars. I can get like tanks and tanks of gasoline. Why don't I appreciate all that? Well, it could have something to do with the fact that the price used to be even lower. See, the price used to be like 89 cents. In the 70s, it was only 89 cents per gallon of gasoline. Therefore, I should be upset and blame someone for the Europeans for the high fuel prices. Okay? So when fuel prices rise, when prices of anything rise, I have to blame someone, right? I would find someone to blame unless I'm personally benefiting. Like if I owned real estate that was appreciating in price, like because it had an oil well on it or something, because then I would appreciate that trend where there was the appreciation of the price and the appreciation of my gratitude for the appreciation of the price. All right. However, when I'm reflexively defining something as a problem, and then I'm afraid to accept any responsibility for relating to it as if it should not be how it is, then, for no reason at all, I blame Thomas Jefferson and William Shakespeare and Judas Iscariot and Eve. It's all their fault. All of it, it's all their fault. Okay? Though, of course, they were only the innocent pawns of Satan. Now, just because I may have personally started the culture of blindness to risk and excessive gambling with borrowed money for real estate speculation, that does not mean that I do not blame any other people anyway. It's simply the popular thing to do these days. So I blame the media for teaching me who to blame for my life, which is a problem. They forced me to watch their programs and to believe the content of their programming. They taught me that I should blame the media, which I do, right? I'm loyal like that. And now it seems to me like there is absolutely nothing that I can do about it because I've been programmed, right? It's just it's like indoctrinated, and I don't see any other alternatives. I don't even. It's like I'm blind to the whole thing. I don't even know that I'm doing this. What I'm doing right now, like with my fingers, I don't even know. All right. Now, it's really just a question of exactly what part of the media to blame for which particular part of reality that I'm forced to condemn as how it should not be. Okay? Who do I blame for the media not being how they should be? It's obviously the fault of the newscasters who have also affected how I pronounce things wrong. And it's a problem. Okay, Now they just sit there and read the scripts that the copywriters create and that the cameraman film and that the advertisers support. And of course, none of that would be possible without the electric company and the scientists that discovered electricity and Eve. I'm serious, because all the descendants of Eve, right? It's a problem, and it's like the newscasters. They're the ones to blame. In other words, all things that I do not like are entirely the exclusive responsibility of the newscasters. Now, have you punched like done some serious jaw repositioning, right, to a newscaster lately? Have you punched a random newscaster lately? If not, I may begin to question your loyalty to the anti-negativity counter-revolution, which I started on. Well, I haven't started it yet, but I'm going to. I'm going to, like, one of these days. All right. Now, consider that a culture of distress, a culture of distress is the natural result of having too much of a sense of humor, having too much fun, and having too much of a sense of humor, especially an excessive use of irony and parody and insight and wisdom and intelligence. Furthermore, a culture of blame is the inevitable result of practicing the behavior of blaming others for the results that we personally experience. Okay, so since you are trapped by me in a culture of distress and blame, you should naturally blame me for trapping you in an obsessive addiction to distress and blame. Prior to March 3rd, 2003, as you already know, no one had ever invented blame or distress, and again, I apologize for personally and exclusively starting the overwhelming and debilitating trend of cultural hysteria from which there is no escape possible whatsoever. Now that you know who to blame, and you blame me completely, I again apologize. I'm sorry. I am personally responsible for the rise and fall of all prices everywhere, including gasoline prices worldwide, real estate prices worldwide, your precise amount of personal income at any particular time, like 2 p.m. next Tuesday, right? Okay. And every choice that you've ever made in how to invest your time and your money, I'm personally responsible for that. All the choices that you've made, everything in your life, how every price, remember how much like a gallon of gold cost in like 2000, in the year 2000 BC? Well, I'm personally responsible for that. So furthermore, because it is, of course, my responsibility to inform you of all this, and I did not do that until just now, right? I'm sorry again. I'm really sorry about that. I'm being severely punished by being put on a disciplinary probation period with a potential termination, like loss of my job as Santa Claus. So if you want me to change your circumstances or any aspect of your life, just send me a written request and I will promptly fulfill my responsibilities to provide you exactly what you indicate to me that you desire. And please be specific, because some people have said, like, I want to have a wife, and then they were not really pleased with the specifics. So be precise, okay? Now, please note that you must properly complete the required forms and include a money order for the exact administrative fees, which I understand can be excessive, but that's, part of, we can't serve everybody, I mean, not all at once. We've got to, it's like, it's a lot of logistics to handle everybody's requests for all their desires, and sometimes they conflict, and like everybody can't be married to like Jessica Alba. Like, it just doesn't work that way. So, let's see. Complete the required forms properly. Okay, legibly. You may want to just type over them. Okay, and then include the money order for the exact administrative fees, because we don't give change, and if you're like close to the right amount, that doesn't do it. So then allow 7 to 10 days for processing, maybe 7 to 10 years. It depends on the nature of your request. Also, you need to know my mailing address, but it's a secret. Therefore, I have no idea what you're going to do about being forced by me to practice distress, blame, hysteria, and paranoia. Again, I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.